Death had marked the old stable as its own. Forgotten on the town's edge where shadows stretched longer than anywhere else, the once proud barn sagged beneath years of neglect. The roof, missing shingles like a mouth missing teeth, allowed rain to seep through, dripping steady rhythms onto the rotting floor below. Weeds pushed through cracks in the foundation, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. This place that once housed champions now stood as a memorial to broken dreams. Inside, standing motionless in the dim light, Shadow waited for the end. His coat, once gleaming like polished obsidian, now hung dull and patchy over a frame where every rib pressed against his skin. His hip bones jutted sharply, his once powerful neck now thin and weak. 5 years ago, this thoroughbred had thundered down tracks as crowds roared his name. Newspapers had called him the Black Lightning Bolt, a rising star destined for glory. But racing spotlight was merciless. One injury, one bad season, and even the greatest became disposable. Shadow had passed from owner to owner, each valuing him less than the last, until finally, he arrived here. The last stop before oblivion. The stable owner had promised to find him a home, but weeks turned to months. Visitors came rarely now, and when they did, they passed his stall without a second glance. Who wanted an aging racehorse with a permanent limp? The hay in his trough grew stale. The water bucket emptied more slowly each day. The stable had once echoed with the sounds of life, hooves on wood, handlers calling to each other, the soft nickers of horses greeting the morning. Now silence reigned, broken only by the occasional groan of timber, giving way to gravity and time. Shadow no longer bothered raising his head when wind rattled the loose boards. His eyes, once bright with competitive fire, had dulled to vacant pools. The magnificent animal who once responded to the slightest touch of the reins now stood immobile, conservation of energy his only remaining instinct. Each sunrise brought the same question. Would this be the day someone remembered he existed? Would this be the day his suffering ended? The thoroughbred who had once charged toward finish lines now merely waited, his powerful will to win replaced by passive acceptance. Shadow had become a ghost while still living, his presence fading from the world's awareness with each passing day. Until on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon, soft footsteps approached from beyond the weathered door. Invisible children learn to haunt places adults have forgotten. Lily drifted through corridors at school, her footsteps barely registering on the polished linoleum, her hand raised in classrooms, but never seen. 10 years old, but carrying the weight of someone far older, she had mastered the art of taking up as little space as possible. The divorce papers her parents signed last spring might as well have erased her too, a legal dissolution of not just a marriage, but her right to be noticed in a world obsessed with louder voices. Each afternoon, Lily avoided going home, where her father's new wife filled their house with laughter that died whenever the child entered a room. The woman's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at Lily, this unwanted reminder of another woman, another life. Dinner plates would appear before her and disappear again, conversations flowing around her like water around a stone. She had become an inconvenience, a ghost that required occasional feeding. The edges of town became her sanctuary, places where weeds pushed through concrete, where buildings sagged with age and neglect. She collected forgotten things, a rusty key, a faded ribbon, a cracked marble, treasures that, like her, had been discarded but still held worth. Her backpack became a museum of overlooked beauty, each item cataloged in the journal her mother had given her before disappearing to begin a new life 3 states away. Rain had fallen earlier that afternoon, turning the dirt path toward the abandoned Mill Creek property into mud that sucked at her worn sneakers. The old racing stable had stood empty for years, its reputation for bad luck keeping developers away. Adults warned children to stay clear, rotting floorboards, rusted nails, danger in every shadow, but danger seemed a vague threat compared to the sharp certainty of daily invisibility. Something about the stable's brokenness called to her. Its windows, like clouded eyes, gazed emptily across overgrown paddocks. The wind whispered through gaps in the weathered boards, creating a sound almost like breathing. Lily approached slowly, drawn by an inexplicable certainty that something waited inside, something that would see her when no one else could. The heavy door resisted at first, then yielded with a groan that echoed across the abandoned grounds. Dust motes danced in shafts of light piercing through holes in the roof. The smell hit her first, damp hay, mold and something else. Something alive. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness as she ventured deeper, past empty stalls and forgotten tack. Then she froze, heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. In the last stall, barely visible in the shadows, stood what remained of a horse. Ribs pressed against dull hide, head hanging low, a creature betrayed by the world just as thoroughly as she had been. When it turned its gaze toward her, Lily recognized something in those eyes, not fear, not hope, but recognition. Two invisible souls, finally seen. Trust begins when someone reaches for what everyone else fears to touch. The darkness of the stable felt alive now, disturbed by the presence of something foreign, a child, small and fragile, against the vast emptiness. Lily stood frozen in the center of the weathered building, her heartbeat a wild rhythm in her chest as she faced the skeletal creature before her. Fear, yes, but something else too, something electric that charged the dusty air between them. Shadow had not moved when the door first groaned open. Too many times, false hope had entered, only to leave again. His muscles, once powerful enough to propel him past competitors, now barely sustained his weakened frame. But there was something different about this intrusion. No heavy boots, no frustrated sighs, just the whisper-soft footsteps of someone equally afraid. When he finally raised his head, the effort monumental, his gaze met not the dismissive eyes of adults, but the wide, wonder-filled stare of a child. The girl trembled like an aspen leaf, her small body vibrating with nervousness. The horse's condition shocked her. She had seen pictures of thoroughbreds in her schoolbooks, gleaming monuments to speed and grace. This creature before her seemed their shadow, a ghost impression of what might have been. His coat hung dull and patchy across protruding ribs that reminded her of the xylophone in music class. The comparison made her heart ache. Minutes passed, neither moving. The stable held its breath around them. Dust motes danced in the beams of light filtering through broken boards, the only movement in this tableau of mutual assessment. Shadow watched the child with eyes that had long ago stopped expecting kindness. Lily clutched her backpack straps, knuckles white with tension. Two forgotten souls sizing each other up across a gulf of distrust and desperate hope. Then something shifted in the universe, simple yet profound. Lily took one small step forward. Her sneakers scraped against the dirt floor, the sound startling in the silence. Shadow's ears flicked, but he remained still, watching. Another step, then another. The distance between them shrank with each careful movement until she stood just beyond his reach, her breath catching in her throat. Her hand rose, trembling in the half-light. It hung suspended in the air between them, an offering, a question. Shadow lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring to catch her scent. The first touch was feather-light, fingertips against velvet muzzle, warm breath against cold skin. Something electric passed between them, recognition deeper than language. Lily's tears came without warning, streaming silently down her cheeks as her palm flattened against his face. Shadow closed his eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into her touch. The weight of his head, pressed against her hand, felt like trust being placed directly into her palm. Heavy, valuable, breakable. Two broken beings, finding in each other's wounds a strange kind of wholeness. Neither knew it yet, but something fundamental had just begun. A wordless pact between the forgotten girl and the abandoned horse. A promise that both would somehow save each other. Secrets save lives when the right hands hold them, Each morning before school, Lily crept into the kitchen while the house still slept, slipping apples into her backpack, pinching carrots from the refrigerator drawer, stealing crusts from bread loaves. Small thefts, invisible subtractions from a household that barely registered her presence anyway. Her stepmother might raise an eyebrow at disappearing food, but questions required attention, and attention was a currency rarely spent on Lily. The bottles came from recycling bins, plastic water containers, old juice jugs, washed clean in the upstairs bathroom sink when everyone else was watching television. She filled them at school water fountains, between classes, her small arms straining against their growing weight throughout the day. Teachers noticed her backpack dripping sometimes, but said nothing. Just another oddity from a child already categorized as different, already fading into the margins of their classroom. Afternoons became measured in footsteps to the stable, in careful approaches through tall grass to avoid being seen by passing cars. The abandoned building seemed different now, less a testament to decay and more a sanctuary guarding something precious. The broken door recognized her now, yielding to her touch with familiar creaks that sounded almost like welcome. Shadow waited for her. The first time she brought food, he turned away, suspicious of kindness that had always carried hidden costs. Lily placed the apple slices on her palm and sat on an overturned bucket, waiting with the patient stillness only forgotten children master. Minutes stretched into an hour before the horse finally stretched his neck, nostrils flaring to investigate her offering. His lips, dry and cracked, tickled against her palm as he accepted a single slice. Each day brought small evolutions. Shadow began lifting his head when her footsteps approached. His eyes, once dull with resignation, now held a flicker of something almost like hope. Water disappeared from containers she propped against his stall. Food vanished more quickly, ribs still pressed against his hide. But something in his posture had straightened, the invisible wire of his will slowly restringing itself. Lily spoke to him in the quiet of the stable, her voice emerging from months of silence. She told him about math tests and playground exclusions, about a mother who left and a father who seemed to look through her rather than at her. Shadow listened, ears flicking toward her words, eyes never leaving her face. In his attentiveness, she found something she'd forgotten existed, the feeling of being truly seen. The pact between them formed without words, but with absolute certainty. Her daily journeys became a testament to unexpected purpose. Shadow's gradually improving condition became evidence that disappearing wasn't inevitable. Between the forgotten girl and the abandoned horse, something essential passed back and forth with each visit. The most profound magic of all, the simple, revolutionary act of mattering to someone. Through autumn's cooling days, in a stable the world had discarded, two beings quietly refused to let each other fade away. Storms reveal what truly matters when all else is washed away. The sky had been gathering its fury all afternoon, dark clouds swelling with menace, winds twisting through tree branches with growing insistence. Weathermen warned of the strongest system to hit the county in decades. Families secured loose items, checked flashlights, and huddled behind locked doors as the first heavy drops began their percussion on rooftops throughout town. In the abandoned stable, Shadow sensed the changing pressure. His nostrils flared at the metallic scent of approaching rain, ears swiveling toward the increasing moans of wind through broken boards. The structure that barely sheltered him on good days now creaked and shuddered like a living thing in pain. The first flash of lightning illuminated his stall in stark white, followed by thunder that shook dust from rotting beams. When the downpour began in earnest, the roof surrendered immediately. Water streamed through dozens of gaps, turning the dirt floor to mud, soaking Shadow's already thin coat. Each new thunderclap sent tremors through his weakened body. The thoroughbred who once stood steady at starting gates now pressed himself against the back wall, eyes rolling white with terror as the building groaned around him. Across town, Lily pressed her face against her bedroom window, watching rain lash against glass with unnatural force. Her thoughts weren't on the emergency alerts blaring from downstairs or her father's stern warnings to stay inside. All she could see was Shadow, alone in that decaying stable with no one to stand beside him as the world fell apart. The thought hollowed her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her decision, formed not as words, but as absolute certainty. Waiting until her father and stepmother were distracted by weather reports, she slipped downstairs and out the back door. The rain hit her like physical blows, soaking her clothes in seconds. Wind tore at her small frame as she fought her way forward, each step a battle against elements determined to push her back. The mile to the stable stretched into an endless journey. Twice she fell, mud covering her jeans, twigs catching in her hair. Lightning transformed familiar landscapes into alien territories of harsh shadows and blinding light. But something stronger than fear drove her forward. The knowledge that without her, Shadow faced the storm utterly alone. The stable door had torn partially free, swinging wildly on its remaining hinge. Inside, water poured through a collapsed section of roof, turning the center aisle into a churning stream. Shadow's panicked whinnies cut through the storm's roar as Lily fought her way to his stall. She found him trembling violently, eyes wild with terror, his thin body pressed against splintering boards, threatening to give way. Soaking wet, shivering herself, Lily did the only thing she could. She crawled beneath the stall guard and stood beside him, her small hand finding his neck. Shadow's muscles jumped beneath her touch, but he didn't pull away. Through the endless hours of darkness, as timbers cracked and water rose around their feet, Lily remained. When fear overwhelmed him, she pressed her forehead against his bony shoulder, her presence a tether in the chaos. By dawn, when the storm finally relented, something fundamental had shifted between them. They had weathered the darkness together, and neither had abandoned the other when it would have been easier to run. Secrets build fragile worlds that shatter in an instant when discovered. The morning after the storm dawned clear and innocent, the sky scrubbed clean of all evidence of its fury. Lily slipped from her rain-soaked bed, her limbs heavy with exhaustion from the night spent standing guard beside Shadow. The mirror reflected a ghost, mud streaked across her face, hair tangled with debris, dark circles beneath eyes too old for her young face. School was impossible today. Shadow needed her more. Her absence from the breakfast table went unnoticed, or so she thought. As she gathered apples and a half loaf of bread into her backpack, she missed the reflection in the kitchen window, her father's face, watching with dawning realization as she prepared for another secret mission. She missed his frown deepening as he noticed the mud caked beneath her fingernails, the leaves still clinging to her sweater. And most importantly, she missed him following at a careful distance as she slipped out the back door. The path to the stable felt different in daylight. Fallen branches and debris from the storm created new obstacles, evidence of nature's violence scattered across once familiar terrain. Lily moved with purpose, unaware of the footsteps trailing behind her, the growing concern on her father's face as she approached the condemned building that had weathered decades of neglect. When the stable door creaked open beneath her small hands, her father's patience shattered. His voice cracked like thunder across the morning stillness, demanding explanations for her disappearances, her secrecy, her recklessness. In entering a structure that could collapse at any moment, Lily froze, caught between worlds, her carefully constructed sanctuary crumbling around her as her father's anger echoed through the rotting timbers. Then Shadow nickered softly from his stall, and everything changed. Her father's expression transformed as he looked past his daughter to the emaciated horse standing in the shadows. Anger dissolved into horror, then disbelief. The thoroughbred's condition told a story no words could adequately capture. Starvation, neglect, abandonment. Yet somehow the animal still stood, his eyes bright with recognition, as they fixed on Lily. In that moment her father understood what had drawn his invisible daughter to this forgotten place. Phones were called, authorities contacted, a veterinarian arrived with grim efficiency, clipboard in hand, euthanasia kit ready. Phrases like "too far gone" and "humane option" hung in the air as men in uniforms assessed Shadow with clinical detachment. They saw only a starving horse, a liability, a problem to be solved with paperwork and a needle, until Lily pushed past them all. She didn't speak. Words had never served her well. Instead, she simply approached Shadow, her small frame passing under the crossbar of his stall. The men reached to pull her back, warnings rising in their throats, but stopped short at what happened next. The half-dead horse, supposedly dangerous in his weakened state, lowered his head with incredible gentleness. Lily's hand rose to his muzzle, her tears falling freely now as she pressed her forehead against his. Shadow's eyes closed, his entire being softening into her touch. The veterinarian lowered his clipboard. Something inexplicable was happening before them. Something that challenged their clinical assessment with a truth more powerful than protocols or procedures. In the silent communion between broken horse and forgotten child, they witnessed something that demanded they reconsider everything. Healing begins in the spaces between broken things that find each other. The stable no longer stood abandoned on the edge of town. Now it pulsed with new purpose. A heartbeat returning to long-dead wood. Neighbors who had driven past the decaying structure for years without a second glance now appeared with hammers, nails, and determination. Weathered farmers brought spare lumber, women from church groups delivered sandwiches, and retired carpenters assessed damaged beams with knowing eyes. The story of the starving horse and the silent girl had spread through their small community like wildfire, igniting something dormant in hardened hearts. Shadow stood in a freshly cleaned stall, his skeletal frame still alarming, but his eyes brighter with each passing day. The veterinarian had been reluctant, his clipboard filled with protocols that suggested euthanasia as the only humane option. But some things transcend professional judgment. The bond between horse and child had forced him to reconsider, to admit that medicine sometimes needed to bow before mysteries it couldn't quantify. He now visited daily, recording Shadow's vital signs, administering careful nutrition that wouldn't shock his system, shaking his head with grudging wonder at each small improvement. Lily arrived each day after school, her backpack now filled with proper supplements instead of stolen kitchen scraps. Her father drove her, watching from a distance as his daughter transformed before his eyes. The child who had faded into wallpaper at home now directed adults with quiet authority, demonstrating how to approach Shadow, how to speak to him, how to earn the trust of something that had forgotten trust existed. Words that had remained trapped behind her teeth for months now flowed with purpose. Not many, never wasted, but clear and certain when Shadow's well-being demanded them. Each day brought microscopic victories. Shadow accepting a brush across his dull coat, his legs no longer trembling when he stood, his ears pricking forward at the sound of Lily's footsteps. The first time he walked willingly into the small paddock, his movements stiff but determined. Neighbors paused in their repair work to witness the moment, understanding they were seeing something rare and precious, the return of dignity to a creature that had surrendered it long ago. Less visible but equally profound was Lily's transformation. The girl who had shrunk from attention now stood straight back before skeptical adults, advocating for Shadow's needs with unflinching certainty. She absorbed information from veterinary books, asking questions that startled experts with their insight. Her stepmother, witnessing this metamorphosis, began looking at her with new eyes, recognition dawning that she had badly misjudged what lived behind the child's silence. The stable itself evolved from condemned structure to community project. New roof shingles replaced rotted ones, fresh paint covered weathered boards, solid doors replaced broken ones. What began as emergency intervention for one horse expanded into something larger, a restoration of purpose, a reclamation of what had been discarded. In the quiet moments between these visible changes, Lily would rest her forehead against Shadow's, their breath mingling in wordless communication. Two beings healing each other through a connection that defied explanation. His strength returned as her voice grew stronger, his trust expanded as her isolation diminished. Between broken horse and forgotten child, a kind of alchemy occurred. The transformation of shared wounds into shared redemption. Triumph never arrives without first demanding payment in tears. The morning had begun with such promise. Autumn sunshine, pouring through the newly repaired stable windows. Shadow taking his now regular walk around the small paddock, with steps growing steadier each day. The community that had rallied around him spoke of miracles, of the impossible becoming possible through determination and care. Newspaper photographers had visited the day before, capturing images of the horse, whose resurrection had become a symbol of hope for a town that needed something to believe in. Then everything changed in a heartbeat. Lily had been brushing Shadow's coat, which had begun to regain some of its former luster. The ritual had become sacred to them both. Gentle strokes that spoke of permanence, of commitment, of a future stretching beyond the next meal or the next day. Shadow stood quietly, eyes half closed in contentment, when suddenly his legs buckled beneath him. His massive body crumpled to the ground as if the invisible strings holding him upright had been severed all at once. The sound of his fall echoed through the stable like a gunshot. Lily dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his heaving sides, terror freezing her voice in her throat. Shadow's eyes rolled wildly, his breathing rapid and shallow, each inhale a desperate battle. The progress of weeks unraveled in seconds. Neighbors ran for phones. The veterinarian arrived with urgent efficiency, medical bag clutched in white-knuckled hands. His face told the story before his words could. The collapse was not unexpected, merely postponed. Starvation's damage had gone too deep, weakening Shadow's heart, destroying muscle tissue that no amount of careful rehabilitation could fully restore. The kindest option, he explained in hushed tones to Lily's father, would be to end the suffering now, before it worsened. Lily heard these words from where she knelt beside Shadow, her small frame curved protectively over his head. Her tears fell silently onto his muzzle, each drop carrying the weight of helplessness against forces too powerful to fight. In this moment of crisis, the girl who had found her voice through advocating for Shadow now returned to silence, her words swallowed by grief too vast for sound. Shadow's breathing grew more labored, his sides heaving with effort. The ground beneath him was unforgiving, the autumn sunlight now seeming cruel in its indifference. Lily pressed her forehead against his, her hand resting on the space between his eyes, as if trying to transfer her own strength into his failing body. Her tears continued to fall, marking paths down her cheeks before landing on his dark coat. The veterinarian approached with gentle determination, syringe prepared to deliver final mercy. Lily's father stood nearby, his own eyes damp, understanding that some lessons about life and loss come too early, too harshly. The small crowd that had gathered maintained respectful distance, witnesses to a farewell that felt unspeakably intimate, yet somehow universal. The ancient human experience of loving something mortal. In this suspended moment, captured accidentally by a neighbor's camera, something profound was distilled, a child's boundless capacity for love meeting the brutal reality of life's fragility. Shadow's half-closed eyes reflected resignation, while Lily's tears spoke of a refusal to surrender. Between them, in that narrow space where her tears met his muzzle, hung the question that breaks and rebuilds hearts across lifetimes. Is love enough when everything else fails? Miracles wear the disguise of impossible moments that refuse to accept their own impossibility. The veterinarian's hand paused, syringe suspended between intention and action. As something shifted in Shadow's labored breathing, a tremor passed through the fallen horse's body, not the weakening shudder of approaching death, but something else, a gathering. Lily felt it first, her tear-streaked face still pressed against his muzzle, the almost imperceptible tightening of muscles beneath her touch. Then Shadow's front leg moved, scraping weakly against the ground, followed by a deeper breath that expanded his sunken ribcage more fully than before. The stable held its collective breath as Shadow struggled, his body remembering what his spirit had never forgotten. With agonizing effort, front legs straightening first, then back legs trembling beneath redistributed weight, he rose, unsteady, swaying slightly, but standing, eyes clearer now, fixed on Lily with unmistakable recognition. The veterinarian stepped back, medical certainties crumbling before the evidence of his own eyes. Science could explain starvation, muscle atrophy, and heart damage, but it had no language for this. A resurrection born from the tears of a child who refused to accept goodbye. Weeks became months. Shadow's recovery continued without further crisis, each day adding flesh to his frame, strength to his stride. The stable, once scheduled for demolition, transformed into something extraordinary. A sanctuary. Word spread beyond town borders, drawing other abandoned horses, other broken spirits, needing restoration. Volunteer grooms appeared on weekends, feed companies donated supplies, and a retired racehorse trainer offered his expertise without charge. What began with one starving horse expanded into a movement, a community reconsidering what deserved to be saved. Lily bloomed in this new reality. The girl who had once slipped through school hallways unnoticed now stood before community groups, explaining rehabilitation methods with quiet confidence. Teachers who had overlooked her now listened attentively as she presented research on equine therapy. Her stepmother, initially wary of this transformation, now drove her to meetings with potential donors, pride gradually replacing indifference. Shadow became something of a local celebrity, his photograph appearing in regional magazines. Besides stories of improbable survival, visitors came to witness the horse that defied death. But they encountered something more profound, the silent communication between Lily and Shadow that needed no words, no commands, just the invisible current of complete understanding passing between them. Some called it a miracle, others labeled it exceptional animal husbandry, but those who watched closely recognized it as something both simpler and more extraordinary. What happens when one soul truly sees another? On sunny afternoons, Lily could be found sitting beside Shadow in the paddock, her homework spread across her lap, his body curved protectively around her small frame. Two beings who had once been invisible, now impossible to overlook. Two stories of abandonment rewritten into a single narrative of restoration. Proof that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe might simply be refusing to let someone disappear. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more videos that celebrate the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Your support helps us share these stories of hope and healing with viewers around the world. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video where another remarkable journey awaits.